Welcome back to the Barton and Bud Show, your weekly update on all things college football recruiting, NFL draft, everything else we can find, maybe a little coronavirus mixed in. And this week we got a lot going on, Bud, at 24/7 Sports. We've got new rankings coming out the day after this recording. We've got all the companies that we're working on. Position U series that we'll talk about today. We've got a lot of recruiting scoop that we can kind of bring to you so you can consume it from a macro perspective. Other than that, Bud, just another day at the office. How are things going down there in Florida?
Going well, man. The heat is finally here. Yesterday we had about 94, so it was solid. Took my son on a walk on the trail. It's got a lot of trees and a little shade, and it's been good. I'm happy that we still have content to write about. Like I'm kind of the idea guy, and so far we're not doing stuff like let's draft our favorite ice cream bar or any of that kind of nonsense. Like I'm not saying we won't ever have to do that. I mean, if we don't have a football season come October, I mean I'm going to want to know like what Barton's favorite Sunday toppings are on his ice cream. But man,
it seems like the last couple of days there's been a little bit of positivity on the football front in terms of just getting it played. Some schools are going to get some kids back on campus to work out in June. It sounds like schools are going to try to be in session in the fall in a lot of places. But hey, it might not be everywhere. Pac-12 might be a little different story out there. So I'm optimistic that at least we won't have to get into the candy bar drafts.
Yeah, I was talking to Marcelo yesterday, Brendan Marcelo, our colleague, and I was like, all right, what do you think the breaking point is, right? Like, if the SEC is ready to go September 1 and the other conferences are like, hey, will you wait on this till October 1? My guess is they probably would. If it's just the Pac-12 out there straggling, I think they're going to be like, peace out, Pac-12, right? Like if you got 4 of the 5 P5s, I don't think they're waiting.
My theory right now is like you're going to have a postseason that is an 11-0 conference champion Ohio State playing a 9-0 conference champion Alabama or something. Just the schedules are just everyone's going to just get in what they can, and it's just going to be a year where things aren't neat and tidy. And hey, I mean, that's college football in a nutshell anyways, in a lot of ways. And so I think there might be some dips. Maybe you take some time off in November, December. Maybe the national championship game is played in February. I don't know. But I think it could just be all over the place. But I think games in some form or fashion will at least get on the field.
I do too. And if we have to go back to like a voting system, that's basically what college ball was for most of our lives, man. I mean, the BCS came about as a result of things like BYU winning the national title after winning the Holiday Bowl, and Washington and Georgia Tech or Colorado splitting, right? Like, or was it? I forgot who split it. Was it Georgia Tech, Colorado, and then Washington, Miami back in the early 90s, late 80s?
I don't know.
Something like that.
So long ago. There's a bunch of it was a mess. It was ridiculous. And now we've cleaned it up a little bit. We're getting closer to having the right format that everyone's happy with. But hey, this might be the year that it's back to the debates. And
Exactly. By the way, shout out to our listeners, 289 ratings. And man, we dipped from that 5.0 perfect. I think somebody hit us with a 1-star, probably #hater, but still 289 ratings is pretty good. Enjoyed the last listener mailbag show. And now we're on the pace for 300 here. If we get 300, we might do a mailbag if they're good ones. If not, we might wait to 350. Just let us know. You can drop your questions there in those Apple Podcast ratings, or if you're a Spotify person, you can't drop any questions there, but you can certainly subscribe on Spotify. And a quick little rundown here, an update on something I've been tracking. By the time you listen to this, we will be at 800 commits right now. Last year at this time, about 350. So more than double the normal pace. And a lot of these are kids who have never visited the school, have never met these coaches in person. And it's going to be for an interesting fall. That's what I'm going to say about that.
Yeah, it's that is assuming, and I am assuming, and you are assuming, we are assuming that kids will once again be able to visit schools and get on the road and explore the recruiting process once again. Because look, if things are locked down from now until February, then yeah, these 800 commits are probably all going to stick. But if
Iowa
guys,
top 10 class, baby.
that's right. But if if the what is it, the green flag goes down, then I think that means that suddenly guys are going to take visits, guys are going to have different information to analyze, and guys are going to make some decommits on a lot of them. So that should be wild.
And some coaches are going to get out there when they visit those high schools and be like, ooh man,
Yep.
this 6'2" is like 5'11".
That too.
Okay.
That too.
Oh man. So let's get into this
yeah.
position you thing, Barton. It's something I was, really excited. You took the lead on this and cranked these out and really owned this whole series. You interviewed coaches for it as well. I liked how we've been creative, and this was your brainchild here on doing deep dives. The month of May, we've done defense for June. We'll be doing offense. Probably not that hard to guess there. This is fun, man. So you went and you took results over the last 5 years, right? And you said, okay, who's done the best job of recruiting and developing and putting guys into the draft? We use the draft as our objective measure of talent because obviously, like, sports writers who are only at one college ball game a week don't always do the best job of voting on things for like All-America teams. So we use the draft, and I just kind of want to pick your brain on some of this stuff before we jump into the positions. Why 5 years? And then did you have any difficulties in saying, hey, the numbers say this, and this school is obviously going to be awarded, but now like this coaching staff is over here, right? Like, did you think about maybe doing coaching staffs or coaching combinations instead of the schools? How did you arrive at schools?
So first of all, I was very hesitant, if not reluctant, to call this a Position U series, because Position U is such a arbitrary, subjective debate that could mean whatever you want it to mean. It could mean who's getting drafted. It could mean who's winning awards in college. It could mean who's doing well in the NFL. But the bigger issue for me was like Florida State. If they're gonna claim Position U, and they're gonna claim Deion Sanders and Jalen Ramsey and whoever else, and yet the reality is those guys, like, I don't know, maybe Jalen Ramsey fits in the last 5 years. I can't remember how long he's been in the league, but like Deion Sanders is a very is very present in any DBU conversation. But Deion Sanders in terms of today is not all that relevant, because what like the goal of this is to find out who is, because it, as you mentioned, it plays along with our whole series of digging into these positions. I wanted to see who's doing a good job of evaluating and developing right now. I want to see which programs are finding these guys and which programs are putting these guys in the league. And then once they're in the league, like the rest of our rankings, I don't really care that much. It's about getting these guys drafted. And so, if Miami's got a bunch of first-round NFL draft picks in the early 2000s, that's great for Miami's pedigree, but it doesn't do a whole lot for validating Miami's current coaching staff, Miami's current process. And so that's why I limited it to 5 years. That's a fairly arbitrary number. It's just a clean whole number. It gets past 4 cycles, which is one college career gets you to 5, and then again, it's typically at least incorporates some level of development with the current staff. But you're right, because and especially as we go through this, like Florida is a great example. I mean, Florida was very present in all these defensive breakdowns. But when you look at the guys who were evaluators on these Florida staffs, it was Will Muschamp, it was Dan Quinn, it was DJ Durkin, it was Tavares Robinson, it was all these guys that are in the NFL or have coaching jobs or elsewhere, and they sort of left these guys. And look, whether it's Jim McElwain or maybe to a degree Dan Mullen, they deserve some credit too for the development, but you don't know. It's hard to say where to draw the line from credit for the development, credit for the production, credit for the evaluation. So look, at some point I just had to call it and just say, look, we're going to do 5 years. We're going to do purely based on the NFL draft and where they're picked and then how many were picked and at what level. And we're going to let the numbers tell the story, and then we can parse it out however way we want. And we'll do a little bit of that now. As we start going through this, we'll kind of I'll try to sort of clarify like where some strengths and directions go, and how much should be attributed to old staffs or new staffs. But that's sort of the fun of it. Like, the data's there. Here's the data. Now figure out what you think about it.
Absolutely. And with these, I also want to ask you, like, going into this, with each of these, who was a school that you thought, oh, they'll definitely be on the list, but then when you dug into the data, they weren't? And let's figure out, okay, why? Like, is it because their guys were really good in sort of that like 14 to 16 range, but not last 5 years? Or is it because they have some guys who are studs in college now, but they haven't got drafted yet? I think that'll be interesting to think about too, because we'll see a lot of arguing about this on the message boards, as I'm sure you might have been tagged in a few really constructive criticism responses here. So, linebacker U starts at the top, man. LSU. Hit us with how has LSU done this?
Yeah, so I think the thing with LSU that I found interesting was they've been, like, we talk a lot about the evolution of the linebacker position and how a linebacker today looks different than a linebacker of even just 5 years is sort of a good spot to start this conversation at. But like, a 2010 linebacker and what you want and what you're trying to defend is different than a 2020 linebacker and what you want and what you're trying to defend. And the way you should evaluate them is different. And LSU, in some ways, is very modern in terms of the guys they produce, but a couple of these guys are real old school too. Like Jacob Phillips, third rounder, I think, is a true, like, kind of an old school Mike. Kendall Beckwith the same way, could actually sort of move back from defensive end in high school in a lot of ways, and is one of these bigger bodied guys that you see it, in an old LSU 3-4 or in an old Alabama 3-4, to take on lead blockers and that kind of thing. But then they've got a couple of these, like, Deion Jones is a great example of one of these early, really athletic guys, undersized, developed into a big time player. And then Patrick Queen is the most recent one, who was an athlete in high school, ranked as an athlete, 200-pound kid, 6'1", 200, and just developed into this stud. And then you got Devin White, who is just a freak of nature, who was 265-pound kid that ran a sub-11 second 100-meter dash in high school. And actually jumped over from running back in high school. But I just thought LSU, and look, it's they've been and all these guys, and I think interestingly enough, we're not even, for linebacker, to clarify, we're not including like Kayvon Chasen, we're not including the edge rushers in that Dave Aranda defense. These are just the true off-the-ball linebackers, and for them to be at number one, I think is a pretty strong testament to them, and probably a pretty good testament to Dave Aranda and his ability to put together a defense that allows those guys to make plays.
It's interesting too. You bring up Aranda, who's now the coach at Baylor. Is he the guy you give the most credit for this? Because when I think LSU, I don't think linebackers, right? I traditionally think like, pass rushers. I occasionally think D tackles, going back to their like Glenn Dorsey teams. And I definitely think DBs, but to see them at top of the linebacker board, is there one specific linebacker coach there that you think maybe underrated from this? Somebody you came away with having kind of newfound respect for?
Well, I think Dave Aranda does deserve probably a lot of credit for it. I'm pretty sure he's been coaching their middle linebackers as he's been the defensive coordinator. And, and obviously he put together good linebacker groups when he was at Wisconsin. He's just sort of, he's obviously a really good coach. They paid him $2.5 million a year at LSU. So there's that. But I think he's probably the guy you point to. But you're right. And in fact, at edge, because I kind of envisioned LSU having a bunch of edge guys drafted too, they really only have, I think, two guys that have gotten drafted in the last 5 years at edge. Kayvon Chasen this year, and then I'm forgetting who the other one would have been.
Is it Mingo?
No, he's before. He was
before. Okay.
Yeah, he's a while back, but so I can't remember what the other one was. It's someone, I'm kicking myself for missing it, but yeah, I mean.
Arden Key, probably.
Yeah, I think that's right. So yeah, I was a little surprised to see LSU number one at off-ball linebacker, to be honest with you, and surprised they didn't show up on the edge group.
That's really interesting. So at number two, you have Ohio State, and this gets into something that we love as evaluators. Look how many of these guys play different positions other than linebacker in high school.
Yeah. Malik Harrison played quarterback, wide receiver, running back, linebacker, safety. Jerome Baker played both sides of the ball. I think he was like a 1,100-yard rusher or something at running back as a senior. Darren Lee played safety and quarterback. Josh Perry and Raekwon McMillan are a little more of the traditional types. But I think this speaks to Ohio State being on the front end of being able to find really good, like understanding the direction of the position. And this I think goes for a lot of their positions. And by the way, Ohio State may be the most impressive, like just showing across the board on defense of any program, like near the top in every category. Just a pretty unbelievable job there by that staff. But again, not all these Ohio State guys were not all these Ohio State guys were like 120 tackle guys that are lining up at Mike in high school. Like Ohio State did a really good job of projecting, identifying athleticism, identifying the ability to add weight and evolve and produce these guys at a really high level.
That's really impressive. And Ohio State's another team that I do kind of think about. And to me, they're a little more traditionally good linebacker team than LSU in my mind. Maybe it's just a mental block that I have. I don't think linebacker and think LSU, but now I do. With Ohio State, they're another school that I think DB. And I know we'll talk about that in a second. Another thing that sticks out to me looking at this list, and we'll have a couple more SEC teams on here, is that volume really mattered here. With the scoring system, you gave 7 points for a first rounder, 6 for a second, 5 for a third, 4 for a fourth, obviously 3, 2, 1, all the way down to seventh round. So this really does reward schools that have put a lot of guys in the NFL. Like you don't have many examples of here where it's just like, hey, this school put 1 first rounder in and then they have 2 seventh rounders. So we're not really we're not rewarding. Hey, you recruited 1 complete like mega stud and then had 2 other seventh rounders and you get on the list. For the most part, like these schools are producing really good volume.
Yeah. And I think like to that point, like you could really kind of get lucky on a first round talent. Just get them. You got a first round talent, and that doesn't make you a hotbed for linebackers or any position. Like you really need to be able to show consistency producing in the early rounds, and so that's where the schools we're talking about are those. I thought that Alabama was an interesting one too, because that's probably a school you think of as linebacker U. And again, I didn't include the edge guys, so don't get upset when you don't hear some of these traditional edge rushers come off the board. But what I found really interesting about Alabama, so the guys that you're talking about with Bama is Rashaan Evans, Reuben Foster, Reggie Ragland, Mac Wilson, Sean Dion Hamilton. Think about that group and think about the way they play, think about the body types, and think about how old school that group is. And then I sort of fast forward and look, there's been Dylan Moses is going to be drafted next year really high, so that'll keep the train rolling there. But I think in the way Alabama's recruited, I don't know that other than Dylan Moses, there's a lot of guys that were on the roster this past year that are that new age, like I'm talking 2019, that new age linebacker that we're talking about with LSU, with one exception. And that was the starting true freshman, Christian Harris, who played freaking cornerback in high school. And so I just wonder if Alabama, like if Christian Harris continues to evolve and looks good, takes another step next year and is their guy, I wonder if, that starts to shift the way Alabama recruits the linebacker position, because they seem to be a little bit more reluctant than some others in terms of moving on from that big guys beat up small guys mentality. And there's still something to be said for that mentality, but I don't know, linebacker position in particular is one of the most stark contrasts in terms of old school versus the new school approach.
So I have some thoughts on this, right? I used to write an article every year, and I really just kind of copy pasted it and just changed the names. And it would be, okay, Bama just totally shuts down LSU's run game without having to commit an extra man to the box for the most part.
I remember you writing that story. That was good.
Every year. And it clicked every year because Bama fans would share it and LSU fans would hate click it. and I'd have all these screenshots. I have Bama's playing 2 guys 18 yards off the ball, and they're still killing Leonard Fournette. The thing is, if LSU is going to be this spread team, who on Alabama's consistent schedule do they need to recruit that style of player to stop? Now, you might say Georgia, but Georgia now with Monken maybe going a little more spready. If LSU is going to be spreading the ball out and playing 4 wide, 5 wide, then there's not this beast down southwest of you that you have to recruit to stop anymore. Auburn is a team that likes to run the ball, but they like to do it with a lot of misdirection. I don't think you have to be necessarily huge at the backer position to stop them. And so my guess is that Saban is always going to want to have the biggest backers of his contemporaries, but you don't have to be the biggest by a mile, right? And luckily for Bama, they can get the big guys who can run. I just don't know if their guys need to be, 245 in the middle. They might be 235 in the middle at those off-ball positions. But I think LSU not playing spread anymore, or not playing, 2 back anymore, what's holding them back?
It's funny because the irony there is that LSU has always been building their roster to beat Alabama. And Alabama, even though Alabama is sort of the team everyone was trying to catch, Alabama was still building their roster to beat LSU and beat the other teams in the conference that played like that. Now, Johnny Manziel started to change that a little bit. Johnny Manziel started to force, and Ole Miss too, started to force Alabama to evolve a little bit. But still, when you got to those big games, it feels like the bigger, stronger was still kind of the priority, and you could just beat teams up. It's interesting to think about whether now Alabama has to start. If LSU can regenerate what it did last year to some degree, like you do wonder. Now does Alabama start to chase LSU a little bit, and just that balance starts to kind of trigger just a little bit. But that's a great point.
And it wouldn't be like, hey, we're never going to recruit a guy that looks like this again. It's probably just a shift. Like, how many off-ball linebackers on scholarship does Bama carry? Probably 6, I would think. Like
something like that.
It doesn't mean all 6 are going to be in that 2.25 range, 215, 220 range anymore. Just maybe one more. Just a little bit of balance there. You do have to but you do have to consider that A&M does run more pro style, and they actually will use a fullback consistently. But until A&M proves that they can score some points against the better teams in the SEC, I don't know you actually have to worry about them.
So and that's the value of it, or that's the balancing act that's so interesting to me. Is so all right, who's chasing who is reacting to who. So all right, so now LSU spent all this time playing Alabama's brand of football and just trying to beat them with their game. Now they switched to the Joe Brady stuff and blew it out the box. And now, hey, all right, maybe Alabama tries to adjust to affect LSU. Meanwhile, like you mentioned, all right, now maybe Jimbo's settling back into the old school stuff. That's going to be where the advantage is. And so I think that's what's so fascinating about this is who's going to have the roster. And I think the fact that different teams are winning in different ways is going to allow maybe an A&M type to all of a sudden build an advantage by just sticking to their guns. Maybe in Iowa by sticking to their guns, something like that. So this is going to be kind of fun to see how teams continue to play cat and mouse with this stuff.
And it's not. Let's also not act like this is the first time that Alabama has reacted or changed to their environment, right? Like we saw them get smaller and quicker on the defensive line, particularly after the Manziel stuff and after the Ole Miss losses, right? Kirby Smart was very vocal about how they had to change the way they played some things and how they had to change some of the body types that they recruited at end. Like they don't necessarily have Terrence Cody anymore in the middle, because like Terrence Cody's a liability if you face one of these no huddle teams. I think the specific change here is not a reaction to the no huddle, but it's a reaction to how much the game is becoming a space game and how teams are actually using the entire width of the field now. And also, maybe going a little more vertical than some spread teams might have. So you have to have backers who can turn and really carry guys. If you're going to play that zone, if you're going to play that match zone stuff, which I know is maybe a little bit less prevalent now because of the RPO game, like you have to have backers who can carry a guy for more than 5 yards, right? Your backer might have to carry a guy 10, 12 yards at times until the safety picks him up. So I think that's very interesting. And another team we're about to talk about here, and I promise this will not be a podcast just about linebackers, is a team that has a lot of guys who already fit that mold, and that's Florida.
Yeah. And the thing that my big takeaway on Florida, and look, I'm not surprised that Florida was really well represented here. I kind of mentioned that, but the interesting takeaway from Florida was just, I mean, look, that the Dan Mullen staff isn't going to get credit for anybody from a recruiting standpoint because they were in recruiting these guys, and that's not their fault. They couldn't. But when you look at the guys that were recruiting these players, Jared Davis, his recruiting, like the guys that his lead recruiter was Dan Quinn, current head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. His secondary recruiter was DJ Durkin, who would go on to obviously recruit or head coach of Maryland, currently at Ole Miss. Same two primary and secondary recruiters for Alex Anzalone. And the Vashon Joseph was a Randy Shannon find. I just think and a lot of these Florida guys too were underrated 3-star types. And so I think it's always interesting too, as we go through this, to see sort of who are the staffs you should trust as identifying 3 stars and producing them, and who maybe should you not. Obviously, I don't know how relevant it is with Florida now because all these guys are gone, but that crew had a pretty good knack for finding value 3-star prospects and getting the most out of them.
Let me ask you this. Any of these guys you think if they came along now would be 4-star prospects based on how we are trying to adapt our rating process to the trends of the game?
I think so. I mean, I think Alex Anzalone would still be highly rated because he was, nothing changes there. But I think Jared Davis, I just wondered, like, he was a high 3-star for us. Antonio Morrison was a high 3-star for us. I would have to think back, like, I don't know how much we really knew about Jared Davis. I don't know how much we really knew about Antonio Morrison. Like, I would just have to remember the profiles for them and why they were 3 stars. And I do think Jared Davis comes to mind as someone that might have been a little bit like just a late find. And maybe we didn't have much to go on other than highlight film, but certainly, like, the size makes sense. The profile makes sense for us to rank highly, but I'm not well enough versed in what their high school profile was to be confident saying, yeah, we definitely would have hit them in today's process.
My guess is that Morrison, who was like 6'3", 220, 2.25 already in high school, probably is not the profile of the guy we would have elevated even more. Like he worked out really well at Florida, had some off-field stuff. I think he actually had a recent, I was just clicking on his profile here for a bunch of stuff off-field. But I think Jared Davis is one who maybe we would have, and maybe Vashon Joseph now with our increased emphasis on athleticism. Michigan makes the list for their hybrids. Devon Bush. Devon Bush is a kid I was wrong on out of high school, man. He was extremely productive in high school, and he was pretty athletic. I just thought he was sort of maxed out looking, and he was extremely well coached because his dad was a former all-pro safety and was the head coach of his team down there in Florida, and they won the state title. And I was like, okay, like, how much better can he get? He looked a little bit maxed out. He actually put on a lot more weight in college and got a lot faster. And maybe that's a credit to Michigan's strength program or his personal work ethic. But he like continued to grow in college, it looked like, and ended up being awesome. I was wrong about him. I didn't think he was going to turn out to be a superstar, and he was.
Yeah, you weren't alone. I mean, because the thing with that, I remember Devon Bush specifically because we knew how highly Michigan thought of him, and so I was constantly checking back in with our guys in Florida, like, and I'm not absolving myself here because I was just sort of I was very, like, I couldn't get a good read on the film. I was undecided, and so didn't have a strong opinion. But I was just constantly checking back in with our Florida guys, like, hey, are we sure on this? Like, should we not bump them? Are we sure? And And they would always be like, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't see it. And in their defense and in your defense too, like I interviewed him during the lead up to the NFL draft last year in Nashville. He still doesn't look like a like the body type is not unique at all. And so it's it's very hard to envision that and be like, oh yeah, that's got a future first round draft pick.
5'11", 2.25 in high school.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm sure this kid's not going to get that much bigger, and he's not going to get that much faster. And he did both, and that's really to his credit. I remember the conversation that I had with the Florida State staff at the time, because his dad, he's obviously a legacy prospect there. And was it Gill or Josh? There was another guy on his Flanagan team that Florida State wouldn't offer. And I think he ended up actually doing fairly well for Michigan as well. But they basically were of the mindset that Bush was not good enough to warrant offering his teammate. And they were just coming off a national title, so they had a lot of cachet at the time and had limited spots. But they would have definitely taken Bush. They did not want to also offer his teammate who Michigan signed that year. And thus he ended up going to Michigan, and they missed out on an All-American.
Yeah, it was so Josh Uche was in that class too, but he was a different high school. It was Josh Metellus,
yeah,
out of Flanagan that also got picked, and then
he ended up having a good year.
Yeah, he did. And then Devon Gill. I think Devon Gill was the third one out of that high school that they took.
Yeah,
I think Devon Gill's the one that didn't necessarily do much, but Metellus has a good career.
That was a great high school defense, by the way. It also had Stanford Samuels on it.
Oh yeah,
that was pretty solid.
So, and then the knock on, like, I didn't include Jabril Peppers, and a lot of Michigan people got salty that he wasn't on this list because he sort of was treated as a linebacker. And then I didn't include Josh Uche either. But again, everyone counts somewhere. So both those guys counted at other positions, and they ended up doing okay there. So maybe we should move on to DBU from here.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So with DBs, the names at the top really probably won't surprise anybody. Ohio State, Florida, Alabama, LSU, Clemson, Washington, Utah, and then at the end here, Miami, West Virginia. Barton, we don't have to cover each of these, but any of these really stand out to you? Any trends that you've noticed from the tops?
So a couple of things jump out. One, Ohio State, I mean, it's just ridiculous. And I know, like, there was actually somebody, there was a coach that reached out to someone in our network and was like, how could you guys have, this was a coach in the NFL, who was like, how could you guys not have Bama above Ohio State? Ohio State Bama has all these all-pros. How many does Ohio State have? And all this stuff. And it's like, again, this is not really about that. This is more about what the college careers produced. And to have 8 guys drafted from the defensive backfield in the last 5 years, 6 of them in the first round, is just insane. Like, that's ridiculous. So that's been really impressive. Obviously, Jeff Hafley deserves some credit, who's at Boston College now, but really the guy that deserves the most credit at Ohio State in terms of just building that pipeline is the guy that came back, Kerry Coombs, who was at the Titans and is now back at Ohio State. And so I think that's been just what they've accomplished in terms of how they evaluate the position, how they develop the position. They're, man, it's just, can't say enough about it. Then a couple of things that jump out to me, like, I think Clemson's got a better track record than people realize, and especially in terms of the way they've developed and utilized the safety position. Washington has got, I think they only had like 6, but I think 4 of them were in the second round, and there's more coming. So I think Washington is sort of ramping up. Utah, huge draft this year, but I think Morgan Scalley, their defensive coordinator, safeties coach, is a stud and deserves a lot of credit for how they've developed the position. And then the last one that was kind of interesting, like, Miami had 8, which was one of the higher totals, but they're almost all late round picks. And it speaks a little bit to trajectory and just sort of, I mean, Miami is definitely like, right down there in a hotbed of DB talent, and they're certainly getting their fair share. But for whatever reason, they're not really producing the first, second round guys. Artie Burns snuck in there, I think, in this group as I think maybe a 2016 first rounder. But aside from that, they're pretty much all day 3 picks.
And they may have some more guys coming soon, but you're right. They haven't done that great of a job recently there. If I'm a college head coach, after Will Muschamp gets fired, or excuse me, if he gets fired, whenever, I want Will Muschamp as my defensive coordinator. I think that guy is a great defensive coordinator. Now, his offenses are routinely terrible, but the guy can coach defense and he can scout defensive players. I mean, he really has a talent to do that. And I think sometimes people get put in roles that maybe you're not that well suited for them, but like defensive coordinator is one that he just fits perfectly, man. Like, again, a lot of these were Muschamp evals. Looking at the Gator seal, Keanu Neal, Marcus May, Wilson. Obviously, everybody knew Wilson was a stud, and his little brother's coming as well. And then Dawson, a guy like Duke Dawson is sort of an example of one of these hybrid players who's very valuable in the modern game because he can play in the slot, he can play safety, he can play some corner, and really has that versatility. You can run your nickel and dime packages with him, and we're seeing more versatility throughout this list. Did you count Isaiah Simmons as a backer or as a safety, by the way?
He was a linebacker, and really was the only reason that Clemson got on that line. But not the only reason, but I mean, had he not been in there, Clemson wouldn't have been in the linebacker group. But between him and Dorian O'Daniel, there's a couple pretty highly rated guys. But yeah, we treated Isaiah Wilson as a linebacker.
Let's go to a question here. I was saving a lot of these questions for our upcoming listener mailbag, but it's relevant to this, and I wanted to kind of pose it here because we are in defensive deep dive week. Question is from Noel Daddy. Great pod and growth potential, question mark. Love the show, and y'all seem to be top-notch with knowing recruiting and projections. I'm an FSU grad, and there's a lot of discussion on our undersized corner recruits for the class of 2021. While athletic, which can't be taught, he says, there's concerns that they are too small in height and length. To me, everyone wants Stephon Gilmore as the ideal corner, twitchy while having length to cover Julio, AJ Green, etc. An interesting question I have for you two is growth potential for high school corners. Do you have any data on what growth in height and length occurs for corner recruits? For instance, how many inches in height does a corner recruit grow from his high school junior year to his high school or to his junior or senior year in college? I understand it's case-by-case scenario, and looking at puberty and growth spurts and size of older siblings and parents plays a role, but I'm curious if y'all had any data or thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's a good question because I kind of noticed that about Florida State's corners here recently too, in terms of some of the ones that they're taking. I think first of all, like to me, you always would prefer length. You always want length, but what are the factors that can compensate for length? One is ball skills, certainly. Another is speed, certainly. But like if you got a fleet of cornerbacks who are all 5'10", I don't think that's where you want to be. So I always am a little concerned when you're taking like a bunch of those guys, you're not offsetting them with a couple of bigger bodied options. But I think in terms of the growth potential, like I don't necessarily. I think you're just guessing there's some sort of outliers where dad's 6'5" and the kid's young for his grade or whatever, like maybe he's going to grow, but I don't think you can ever like assume that. The thing that I would say, and when I've studied the defensive back and particularly the cornerback position, is like the thing that I don't think matters really at all is weight. Is if a kid if he's 160 pounds and he has length and ball skills, he will add the weight. And in fact, a lot of these guys that go drafted high were in the 160 pound range in high school as cornerbacks, especially the guys with length. And so I think length is more there's some importance with length, more so maybe than height, but definitely with length. There's a really important with ball skills. Weight is the one that I'm very forgiving of, and I'm very forgiving of guys that are really light that aren't that fast. because they get stronger and they get faster. And as long as they're coordinated and athletic, you can kind of count on that a little bit.
Absolutely. So anecdotally, I don't have hard data on this, but I do grab sort of what everybody was height and weight wise in high school and into college for your picks that go really high, and we track those growth spurts and stuff. And I will tell you that defensive backs are typically not the guys who have the big time growth spurts, right? A lot of times it's your positions where, okay, this kid has potential, and then all of a sudden he goes from a backer to a big D end, or he goes sort of down on the defensive position spectrum. I generally think corner is not a position where I would ever want to bet on continued growth in terms of height, because for the most part, the corners that are going to show up and be rated highly are kids who already have good coordination, and typically coordination, I think, tracks fairly well with physical growth and physical maturity, right? It's the guys who are sort of like a baby giraffe still, who all of a sudden get a lot bigger and then a lot more coordinated, which to me are generally at your larger positions, body-wise, than your smaller ones. So I don't have very many, if any, examples of corners getting taller in college. So I
if
don't
you're
think
recruiting
so.
a 5'10" corner, I would just assume you're going to have a 5'10" college player.
I will say with how much RPO game is being played, I think teams are putting more of an emphasis than ever on the ability to play man-to-man. So there's a super premium on your long corners who can play man-to-man. I think there's a little bit of a downgrading of your long corners who used to be able to hide to play zone or match zone stuff somewhat, and maybe a little bit more emphasis being placed on, like, would a school rather now have a 3-star who can actually cover in man-to-man than a 3-star with length? You have to balance it, like you said, though, because your 5'10" guy who can play some man-to-man, his upside is limited. His floor might be higher, whereas your 6'1" guy who's athletic but doesn't know what he's doing, and maybe his agility's not that great yet, you have to kind of look and see, are we balancing our floor and our ceiling of our position room?
But here's the converse of it, though. So if I'm a little bit skeptical of a room full of 5'10", skinny guys, but I am also skeptical of a room full of 6'1", 200-pound corners. Like, just because, like, you're going to look pretty good playing cornerback if you're bigger and stronger than everyone in high school, and that means 7-on-7 pads, whatever. It's how, like, I do think cornerback is a developmental position in a lot of ways, and so how much development and upside is there to go if you've got a bunch of stiff, big bodies? And so I think that's why, like, a balance is important. But I growth potential to me is more about weight than it is about height.
I totally agree. I wonder if there's something to that too. That may be something I study this off season. Like, what is the bust rate for these sort of 6-foot+ corners who are outside the top, like, 400, right? You get all these coaches saying, "Oh, I got this 6'1" corner. We really love him." Like, all right. I mean, do you like him because he looks pretty, or do you like him because you actually think he can cover? I wonder if at a certain breaking point of talent, maybe going with somebody who's shorter can actually cover might make more sense. Now, clearly you want the stud who can do both and who is, 6'1", 6'2". But the drop off there, I think, is pretty steep.
Yeah.
So let's talk about edge here. Some familiar names and also some maybe surprising names coming up here. Edge is a position, it's not official, but it's something that we are probably transitioning to at 24/7 Sports at some point, right? Like, because of all the hybrid defenses being played. No longer will we go weak side defensive end, outside backer. If you're a pass rusher type, we're going to call you an edge. Is that I guess the best way we can explain it?
Yeah, hopefully we get there. But yeah, I mean, that's and I actually found this to be an interesting result. Not surprised that Ohio State was 1, but I actually found, like, as I was posting it, even Michigan fans were surprised to see Michigan at 2. But Michigan landed at 2 and right behind Ohio State, because in the way I did this, I don't give like Joey Bosa, Nick Bosa, and Chase Young. I'll say this: Joey Bosa and Nick Bosa get the same point value as Rashawn Gary and Taco Charlton. So, there's clearly like objectively, or I guess subjectively, we would say that the Bosa brothers are better than those guys and probably should count for more. But objectively, like they're just getting the same point value. They're all first rounders. So that might contribute to why it's a little bit closer. But also the idea of just what I thought was really interesting about Michigan, because again, Ohio State, look, they've done such a good job. Nick Bosa, Joey Bosa, Chase Young, like all guys drafted within the top 3. What else can you say? But I found Michigan landing at 2 to be interesting because hang on one second. Let me cancel that phone call. Because they're such different body types. And like Rashawn Gary and Chase Winovich played very different positions, but they both are kind of edge players and they both count. Josh Uche was a linebacker, but really was used, and what really wasn't even a starting linebacker for the most part, but was used as an edge rusher and was outstanding in that role. I am impressed with Don Brown's ability to cater a defense to different skill sets and find ways to get a lot of different guys to be productive.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, they've had such a variety of pass rushers that really does speak to what Don Brown does. And there's that clip or quote of Belichick saying, somebody asked him, like, who would you get for your defensive coordinator? And he was like, well, the guy at Boston College does a pretty good job. And then Harbaugh went out and got the guy at Boston College. We note that Alabama is slowing down in recent years, but the 2020 recruiting class is coming, including guys like Will Anderson, who is just twitchy. Looking back here at Bama's recent recruiting classes, I'm looking at the 2016 class, which is now basically complete as far as their NFL prospects. Mac Wilson, who we had as an outside backer, he ends up playing inside backer there in the league. Terrell Lewis, did he get a 5th year or did he get drafted?
No, he's a 3rd rounder, I think.
Okay, got it. They've had a couple guys who maybe didn't pan out there, but if you look at the kind of the whole decade for them, they're still going to rate really highly in this because you got some outside guys, Dante and those type of dudes who were pretty special. But it's interesting that they were slowing down and still 3rd on the list, right?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, it feels like they're. We take for granted guys like Terrell Lewis and Anthony Jennings, and so I think that like they're sputtering a little bit by punching out 3rd rounders instead of 1st rounders. And I don't know that there's trying to think. Like, I don't think there's any like obvious 1st rounders from this year's team unless someone emerges. But I think a couple years down the road, like you said, I think this 2020 class will produce some of those kind of guys. Well, at least one, and maybe a few. But I have a lot of confidence in Will Anderson, their incoming edge rusher, to be kind of a monster.
I do too. He is twitchy, and I was talking to a college coach the other day, and I was like, well, this guy's kind of he's maybe not the ideal size for a position. And he's like, dude, the only reason I recruit height is to get the length, right? If this guy's got the length and he doesn't have the height, I don't care. He'll play lower and still be long, which is very true. Yeah. It's one reason why we at 24/7 Sports do pay attention, to things like wingspan and arm length, and maybe are not quite as married to height. One last one I want to hit on here before we throw this to a break is Wisconsin. Like Ohio State, Michigan, Bama, sure. Clemson, yeah, no doubt. Wisconsin, 6 edge rushers drafted, 4 Wisconsin natives you have?
Yeah, I love that. I loved sort of finding that out. Like just the quantity of edge rush talent that Wisconsin's produced is, and when you think of linebackers, when I think of linebackers, it's just sort of my mind's eye sort of like goes to off ball, tackle machines. But that's really not where they've made their money. It's really more of these guys that are just been terrors off the edge. But I thought it was really interesting. Like, look, when you think of line of scrimmage talent, when you think of edge talent, you think of like these big Southeastern Conference footprint players that are these freak that come from Louisiana or Alabama that can go get after the quarterback. Wisconsin, 6 edge rushers drafted in the last 5 years, 4 of them from the state of Wisconsin, and just like really interesting backgrounds. I mean, played, T.J. Watt, as you would predict, played kind of everywhere. Zach Bond played quarterback in high school. One of these other guys played running back and I think little quarterback too. Like, these guys are just, they come from these Wisconsin small schools where they do everything. And then they go to Wisconsin, and interestingly enough, like they're just sort of athletes in a way. They're like defensive athletes. And Wisconsin puts them at edge. And man, they just do a great job of producing them. I thought that was really kind of eye-opening to because Wisconsin comes in 4th in the country. Yeah. 3 of the top 4. I mean, they're tied with Clemson for 4th, but 3 of the top 4, Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, come from the Big Ten. I thought that was surprising.
So I'm struck by this because, like, we know that defensive recruiting rankings end up being better than offensive ones, right? And we've said it a lot of times. It's a lot of it's because defense is a little more, not that it's not a team game, but it's a little more of like a collective individual effort, whereas offense is more of a pure team game. And as such, scheme can seem to impact you a little bit more on offense than it does on defense. But I wonder if edge rusher is not one of the positions where you can really sort of scheme guys into stardom, right? Because Wisconsin is very creative with how they get rushers freed up, and they do a good job. Not that these guys aren't athletic, because they certainly are. Michigan in the same way here. I mean, obviously Rashawn and Chase and Josh and Charlton are all diverse body types, like you noted. But some of these dudes, I wonder if there's a spot on defense that maybe you can scheme somebody up. Like D-tackle, I don't think you can fake it. And after this ad break, we'll talk about D-tackle. So let's go ahead and hear a message from our sponsors real quick. All right, we're back, dude. And Barton, it is time to talk about the big uglies. This is where, for the most part, all the names on this list are going to be pretty obvious. And then there's one that I think we have to talk about.
Yeah, so the top 5 was Alabama, Clemson, NC State, Ohio State, then Florida. And keep in mind, D-line is basically, we're including, 4-eye, like 3-4 defensive end types, 3 techniques, and then nose tackles. And so, like, we're excluding edge players. And so Chase Young doesn't count for Ohio State. And that may sound off-putting to someone to say D-line U. So maybe it's interior D-line U. I don't know. But ultimately, like, we're kind of defaulting to the terminology and vocabulary that NFL seems to be defaulting towards. But Alabama was sort of lap the field. And that's not surprising, except for the fact that, look, I mean, in the same way that, like, this past year, I guess, is the only year, you just weren't as quite as, it didn't feel as dominating of a defensive front. Quentin Williams 2 years ago certainly did feel that dominating. But in terms of who is doing this regularly the most, Alabama is still the team. Clemson goes without saying, Christian Wilkins and Dexter Lawrence. And then the big one was NC State, and who had 4 guys all within the first 3 or 4 rounds, and all pretty much recruited by Ryan Nielsen, who's now the defensive line coach of the Saints. But don't expect it to be just sort of a flash in the pan, because NC State's got really good defensive linemen on their roster right now that are young. And so I think that's going to be a continued strength for that program as well.
I'm going to throw a name at you. Do you remember the kid at the Army Bowl who got his shirt torn off? Or not Army Bowl, but at the Army Combine several years ago, who got his shirt torn off. He was playing D-line. He had kind of a curly hair ponytail, and he was just dominating everybody.
I think it was Josh Clark.
It was, yeah. It was Josh Clark, and I was like, who the hell is this kid? And then I saw him like a couple months later at a camp, because I on my roster, he didn't have a number because he didn't have a jersey. And I was like, oh, that dude. NC State signed that guy.
Yeah.
Like, they've got dudes there at D-tackle, and they do a great job with it. Ohio State, you mentioned here, 3 of the 4 defensive ends moved inside, plus Devon Hamilton, who switched from offensive guard, which is pretty rare, by the way, to go from O-line to D-line.
Yeah, I think he played D-line some as a senior, but he was definitely primarily an offensive lineman, at least up through his junior year. And so, again, that just speaks to Ohio State's development and identification. To find, to take a 3-star offensive lineman and move him to defense. And then, again, their other 3 guys were highly rated players, so whatever, but they took him from edge, kicked him inside in college, and produced, early round draft picks out of him. So I think that was interesting. And then Florida, like the only reason Florida made this list actually is another one. Talk about the evaluation process is Taven Bryan coming out of Wyoming, 3-star kind of kid that played offensive lineman, played defensive line, and came to Florida and just was really athletic, like an elite athlete on the line of scrimmage. And that's such a recurring theme in all this stuff is just athleticism. Like, where's the athleticism? If find athleticism, whatever it looks like, and then build your defense around it.
Yep. If you get that clay, good coaches will mold it. So if you've listened to us this far, we're almost an hour into this show. We're going to go ahead and give you a special treat. We're going to assume you're a pretty big diehard fan of college football. If you're 55 minutes in with us, let's go ahead and drop a preview of the ratings that come out on Wednesday and give a little sneak peek here. And we're going to start with some dudes who moved up in our ratings based on our deep dives. And at first, let's go ahead and start with Tate Williams.
Yeah, so Tate Williams, I love this kid. This is a classic quarantine find. All right, he had no profile a month ago on our site. He was Baylor found him, and he landed a Rutgers offer and like a couple of small school offers, but Baylor took his commitment. But this is a kid who's 16 years old right now. He'll be 17, I believe, as 17 as a senior. I think maybe if not 17 as a freshman in high school or a freshman in college, but he's young for his grade. Point being, he's got 11-inch hands. He's got 6'9" wingspan. He's got 6'4", 264 pounds, and all this stuff is like he's sending like pictures of him getting measured. And he's a starter on the basketball team. He is a 50-foot plus shot putter, 166-foot plus discus guy, and he plays in a town of like 200 people. And he's a West Texas kid. No one's going to see him. No one's seen him before. So there's no way to like find this guy where he might have been found in the spring. Baylor just sort of does all this digging on him, gets these verifieds on him, and takes his commitment because his film is even like it's like a wing tee type of stuff. Like he's just 4-point stance, firing off the ball kind of stuff. But he's so athletic in it. And so to me, I thought this was everything about what we're looking for in terms of like finding these guys that would typically go undervalued. He's a stud to me. And I think it says something about Dave Aranda's ability to adjust to recruiting at Baylor versus recruiting at LSU. LSU doesn't have to go looking for guys like that. LSU can find the guys that are, ready-made. Baylor is not a blue blood in the dictionary definition of it. Like Baylor has to be a little like the Baylor polo ain't beating the Texas polo when they walk in the door. It's from when the coaches walk in the high school. So be resourceful. I think Dave Aranda showed he's able to kind of put his Wisconsin and Utah State glasses on and take a kid like this who might be a little bit more of an upside projection.
All right, so Barton, let's go down our list of when we miss on a kid, like we give him a 2-star rating.
And the preview on that, by the way, is he will be a top 247 kid when those rankings.
Ooh, look at that. That is taking a stance. So
there you go.
When we do our look back, why do we miss on kids who we gave 2 stars to? The most common reasons, right? You just say check when I hit one of these. JUCO, other sport other than football is his primary. No, but he does excel at 2 other sports here.
Actually, you could maybe say check because his also pedigree. His parents are former All-American throwers in college, and so he probably was a thrower first before he was a football guy. I don't know that for sure, but
yeah.
Point being,
multiple high school injury history, position change, outlier physical change, remote high school.
Yes.
Small high school.
Yes.
Yeah. Younger than grade level.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is a kid who, I don't know, maybe a decade ago we never see. He gets, or we see just very slightly, gets a 2-star grade and ends up becoming a first rounder. Who knows? But he does seem to check a lot of these boxes for a guy who maybe, hasn't been super accomplished in football yet. And then, all right. So we're gonna run through this because Barton is getting the hook here. They're gonna call in the lefty from the pen.
I forgot you're looking at my video. Yeah, I got a little knock on the door there, but I'm good.
Are they up from their naps?
They're back in the house, which means all hell's breaking loose.
No doubt. All right. So Nate Wiggins, really stud corner out of Georgia. We like. It seems like the West Coast schools got on him a little more than the Southeastern schools. Maybe a good reminder that the internet and quarantine means everybody's the same distance away from everybody when there's no visits going on.
Yeah, but also that's a kid that was, I think, probably the local programs were looking to get him on campus, and they probably liked him, get him on campus. The luxury wasn't there for the out-of-state schools to pursue him in that way. They had to, if they were going to have a chance down the road, they got to get on them early, and so now they're sort of getting the payoff of that. But that kid, I think, is a stud. He'll be a top 100 commit or recruit for us in the rankings update.
And it'll be interesting to see how much attention and love he gives those Southeastern schools once they decide to offer it and really go all in on him with Oregon and USC on him. Jordan Poole, linebacker out of North Carolina or South Carolina? North
Carolina kid. Loaded year in North Carolina.
Charles Power special all day right here. He brings him to us, just loves the guy. And like, man, this is what these 120 tackle linebackers in college oftentimes look like. He's going to be able to stay on the field for all three downs. He's not huge, but size-wise, he's got enough, we think, combined with the athleticism and the physicality, right? If you're going to be small, you can't be soft. And Jordan Poole, he wipes guys out and shows he's willing to take on blocks. I mean, obviously, you can run around him with the athleticism. This is a kid I think we threw on, and we're like, damn, if we can get any kind of verified size on him, he's a no doubt kid who we're gonna move up pretty high. And it looks like he ended up in the top 100.
Yeah, he's a no doubt. He's like a no-brainer. Like he is a guy that was, running back, safety. Are we ranking him as athlete, as safety, as a running back? What are we doing? When you just sort of like refocus him as a linebacker, he's a no doubt kid. Just and we've gotten off the charts feedback from programs with insight on him as well.
Let's go ahead and have you read the next name because I have no idea how to say this.
I don't know if I'm saying this right either, but Tommy Akingbesote, I'll say, is a first-year football player. He will be a top 200 type of player. He's out of Maryland, maybe DC, DMV, we'll call it. I think he's out of Maryland officially. But this is a kid whose film is awesome. We don't really know how big he is. We found that out. We got some verified size. It's exactly the way you want a defensive line's verified size to be right now. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Christian Barmore, who's going to be a stud for Bama, who was a first-year player in high school. In terms of physical traits, like this is a kid out of Maryland that, hey, some schools are going to be slow on because I think the game tape can show some moments of like head scratching because first year playing. But in terms of talent, this kid's elite.
No doubt. And then the last one here, Aidan Kelly. This is a Barton special, right? Like you found him, I think.
Yeah, I mean this is a classic quarantine kid. He's a two-way player. He's a 50-foot shot putter. He's got really good basketball film. Not that the kid's 280 pounds, so he's not playing above the rim, but his feet are fantastic. And this is what I thought was really interesting too. Like he's got kind of a middling offer list. He has some decent schools here and there, but and trying to track down opinions on this kid, make sure that I wasn't just all alone on an island. The feedback was sort of consistent with everyone really likes him, but sort of like, we don't know if we're the only ones. And so I think this is the type of guy that where he go into more camps, where if you got that one big offer, I think you get all the big offers. And I just, he could be an offensive guard or he could be a defensive tackle. I think he's a defensive tackle, but he's a top 247 kid for us tomorrow as a guy that was, he's out of Oklahoma, just not off the beaten path. I think he's the real deal.
And just to let y'all in on how the rankings call went on this guy, Barton brought him up and we're like, damn. And then we were like, ooh, what classification does he play in Oklahoma? And it turns out he plays 1A ball. I was like, all right, how big is this kid really? Because if he's got verified size, he's kind of a no doubter for us.
Mm-hmm.
And did we ever get verified? It looks like TCU is in on him.
We got verified. I think he is a little under 6'3", 275 pounds. Like he's 6'2.5", 275.
That's cool. I mean, he's the kind of kid where listed 6'3", 260, you just worry that he's 6'1", 250. But if he's verified, I mean, the movement skills, the athleticism, the physicality, they're all there, man.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. We appreciate all y'all listening to the to the Barton and Bud show here. Quick note at the end: 23 of 28 quarterbacks rated 4 stars or better on the composite are currently committed. So be sure to check out Steve Wiltfong's quarterback dominoes piece that he runs every month, and he'll have some more stuff on that. Some more stuff on Miller Moss. Make sure you check out the new college football recruiting show by 24/7 Sports, having all of our regional and national experts on there. Have you been on that yet, or are you lined up for this week?
No, not yet. There's a lot of expertise in line. So I'll when my number's called, I'll be ready.
If you're listening to this show on the website, we love that you go to 24/7 Sports. We'd love it even more if you subscribe. So hit that Apple Podcast button, hit that Spotify button, give us that subscription, that 5-star review, that rating. And man, with the pace we're on, we'll probably have to do a mailbag show next week. And to be honest, I don't mind that because I'm not really sure if we can come up with a ton of topics for next week without a mailbag. So really looking forward to that.
Bring it on.